Very happy to be with you this morning for 15 minutes to discuss about selected legal topics. There are so many of them regarding licensing in open source AI. Everything started not on the West Coast. Everything started regarding open source licensing, and that was in the world of software, more than 30 years back on the East Coast, in the MIT labs. And what were those guys trying to achieve? Basically, they were not lawyers. They were coders, engineers, computer scientists, researchers. And they just wanted simple licensing terms applicable to their use of the software they had access to. So the aim was to provide the users of those software pieces, modules, essential freedoms. And the first freedom you need as a user is exactly that, the freedom to use the software as you see fit without any restrictions for any purpose. But also you had some additional benefits to open source licensing, such as transparency, because you need to have access to the source code. You can understand how it works. Then basically you improve the quality of the code. It's also basically a way to ensure the sustainability of a project, because there is not one single copyright holder that might go down, go south, or pivot. You have a community of contributors contributing slowly to the consolidation of the IP on a project. That's all about open source. And guess what? It even, over time, proved a commercial viable, a successful commercial business model, at least for some companies. So basically, you have now a mature and robust ecosystem. So what's the proposition today? We have more than 30 years of expertise in open source software licensing. Why not leverage on that expertise, on all the things that we did right and we did wrong, to actually try and replicate this success in the AI models world? You take everything that has been done, and this is a success, in open source licensing, and you do exactly the same with AI model licensing. Open source AI, if you want. Okay, so that's the question. Not so fast. So first, some could argue, with some legitimacy, that actually open source licensing is a real mess today. Okay? It has become somehow as complex and thus as inefficient as closed source software. It's a really difficult world to navigate in. And why is that? Because you have a lot of license proliferation. Everybody starts with his or her own licensing terms. You've got license compatibility issues. And I suppose we have also to acknowledge that the computer scientists were not better than lawyers in drafting clear licensing terms. Okay? So it was all about, bashing the lawyers for not being able to provide clear language in the licensing terms. Look at what happened with the GPL language and all the conveyance and all the derived work or work based on the program stuff. So no human have proved good in drafting clear licensing terms. Hence, why should we import all those open source software licensing bugs into the AI world today by trying to replicate what has been done and just copy-paste and apply that to AI models? I think we need to ask the question. Another issue, AI and AI models are not so much about software. This is more about mathematics and data, statistics and data. So it's not the same as software. You can't just use the principles of open source software licensing and just copy that to the AI model world. First, let's remember that mathematical concepts, algorithm, statistical algorithms are not protected per se under copyright law. The way they are expressed and coded is protected, but the algorithms themselves are just free to use. It can't be protected, and if it can't be protected by law, it can't be licensed. Second, data which is at the core of AI modeling, is a different animal than software. You do still have, and also here, copyrightability issues, fair use regarding training data and all that stuff. You also have other issues regarding ownership of data that is not protected by copyright, open access requirements, and you have the whole bunch of personal data stuff and GDPR compliance. So it's not the same to license software and license AI models. Another argument, just to show you that it's not that easy to basically think about open source software licensing and just export it basically to AI model licensing. Software is software. But not all AI models are created equal. It's much more complex. Software, even complicated software, remains software. AI models are different beasts, many components, diverse architectures, many diverse use cases. And there is not this catalyst of the general public license family of licenses that has been able to basically consolidate a lot of open source software projects under the umbrella of the GPL v2. We lack that. We don't have that for the moment in the AI model. So basically the large language model licensing stuff is much more complex than the licensing of software. Okay, so what do we do? I'm just telling you how maybe we should be prudent not to basically copy-paste all the principles of open source software into AI, open source AI. But what are the solutions? What's the path forward? Well, maybe one idea would be to go back to the fundamentals. Let's remember that open source software was about freedoms. And presumably, AI models would also basically need to rely on such freedoms. What are the freedoms that you need as a user with regard to open source AI? So this is an extract of a draft 006 from the Open Source Initiative definition of what is open source AI, just mirroring what you had in the open source software world. So first, it's the freedom to use the system for any purpose and without having to ask for permission. Total freedom. Okay, it's the freedom zero in the open source software open source world. Freedom to study how the system works. Freedom to modify the system for any purpose. Freedom to share the system for others to use with or without modifications for any purpose. So you have those lists of 4 freedoms that basically mirror what was designed at the time by the Free Software Foundation regarding software. Okay, but sorry to say, there is an initial difference, first difference between open source software licensing and open source AI licensing. Those wonderful freedoms that you are granted, that you need to be granted through open source principles. In the software world, you can exercise those freedoms if basically you get access to the source code. And that's a requirement of open source licenses. And when you just analyze and have a look at the source code, more or less documented, that basically you understand what this is about, and then you can properly exercise the freedoms that you've been granted. Think about that in the AI model world. It's not that easy, because actually to really understand how you can use your freedoms, exercise your freedom, exercise your rights, you need to have full access and understanding of the training data sets, the methodologies, the cleanup, the algorithm. You need to have access to all the coding stuff, so all the software and libraries that somehow is also used as a component of a model. And you need also to have access to parameters of the model itself, the weights, the checkpoints. There is much more that you need to grant in open source AI licensing than in open source software licensing. And this is a significant difference in the approach and in the concrete obligations and steps that need to be taken. Let's assume this is overcome at some point. But then the real difference, I think, between open source software licensing and open source AI licensing is the following. Use restrictions. I mean, in any open source license that complies with the open source initiative definition, you need to have the freedom zero, the right to use the software for any purpose without restrictions. That's at the core of the open source software philosophy. What do we have in open source AI? We have broad behavioral rules restrictions, especially in the Rail licenses, but you have others. And it goes really beyond the do no harm covenant. If you use my software, please do no harm. It's extremely detailed. This appendix that was referenced before is really, I don't know, 1-2 pages long, but it covers a lot of possible applications of your open source AI model. I'm not saying that's wrong. What I'm saying is that it is not aligned to historical open source principles. And we really need to think whether we still think that we can call a license open source AI license while that license restricts the ability of the user to actually use the model itself. And that's a fair question. And even if we answer, it's fine, we need that. That's precisely the purpose. It's called responsible AI. So we know we're deviating from the open source software licensing principles, but for a good cause, because we need that kind of protection. Then I think that there is a follow-up question to be asked. Is it fair? Is it acceptable, assuming we can have those restrictions, that the burden of complying with those restrictions is fully pushed and allocated to the user? Remember, open source software licensing was about empowering the users to fight against the imbalance that they faced, because on the other side, you had licensors claiming intellectual property and restricted use of whatever they pushed to the market. Are we actually empowering the users when we set up open source AI licenses with a lot of very broad restrictions? And I don't have the answer to. Easy task, huh? Ask the question. I don't have the answer to this question, but I think we need to integrate that in our reasoning on how to shape proper contractual or legal framework surrounding open source AI. And my guess is that licenses will not be enough. So even if we have clear, binding licensing terms, then will not be sufficient to foster responsible AI. We need to have trust, transparency in the development process, the robustness. Okay, so it's about the design and the setting up, basically, of the models. We need strong ethics. There was a term before used, governance. We need strong governance and organizational frameworks. We need standard-setting efforts, and we may even need, at some point, regulation. You know, EU already thought that they answered this question, so they started with regulation, but there is no regulation regarding open source software licensing. It works, contracts. Maybe we need regulation to intervene regarding open source AI licensing, given the stakes and those restrictions on behavior. Takeaways. I'm not sure that all open source software licensing concepts can be successfully replicated and used in the open source AI world. In particular, I'm really concerned about this introduction of behavioral use restrictions. Second, any meaningful advance in enhancing trust will require not only proper licensing, but broader legal, technical, governance, ethical framework. It was mentioned, and I fully subscribe to that. And so far, Rail has been busy proposing standard licensing terms. The open source initiative is working hard to get a viable minimum product and a draft to try and define what open source AI would actually mean, but this is very much still in the early stage. Thank you so much.